Hi, welcome to the fifth episode of Literary Criticism. Here we are going to begin British literary criticism. Let me remind you that the previous episodes variously discussed the questions such as what is art, how good it is, and what are the characteristics of a good art. Interestingly, here you can sense an approach which combines Platonic and Aristotelian critical systems. Let's move on. England, although it could boast an important emergent literary tradition, starting in the Middle Ages with Chaucer, didn't make any significant contribution to literary theory until the second half of the 16th century, when Sir Philip Sidney wrote an apology for poetry in 1580s. Remember, printed twice in 1595. His impassionate defense of poetic art came as a response to an attack on poetry by a Puritan critic, Stephen Gosson, who followed Plato in arguing that poetry was a waste of time, that it was based on lies, and that it taught sinful things. Sidney's discussion of poetry follows in the path laid out by Horace, insisting that the art serves the dual purpose of instruction and pleasure. Poesy, therefore, is an art of imitation, a speaking picture, with this end to teach and delight. He answers the Puritan accusations that poetry is the mother of lies by following Aristotle's logic. If poetry were merely an imitation of nature, it would be necessarily an inferior copy, hence a form of falsehood. But if poetry is an act of creation, then it completes a process that nature leaves incomplete and partial by teaching us the inner meaning of the things and events of the eternal material world. Among the English critics, Philip Sidney holds a very important place. His apology for poetry is a defense of poetry against all the charges laid against it since Plato. He considers poetry as the oldest of all branches of learning and establishes its superiority. Poetry, according to Sidney, is superior to philosophy by its charm. It is superior to history by its universality. Poetry is superior to science by its moral end. Poetry is superior to law by its encouragement of human rather than civic goodness. Sidney deals with the usefulness of other forms of poetry also. The pastoral pleases by its helpful comments on contemporary events and life in general. The elegy by its kindly pity for the weakness of mankind. The satire by its pleasant ridicule of folly. The lyric by its sweet praise of all that is praiseworthy, and the epic by its representation of the loftiest truths in the loftiest manner. Reply to four charges. Stephen Gosson, in his School of Abuse, leveled 4 charges against poetry. They were: a man could employ his time more usefully than in poetry. That's the first one. Second one, it is a mother of lies. Third one, it is immoral and the nurse of abuse. And the fourth one is, Plato had rightly banished poets from his ideal commonwealth. Sidney gallantly defends all these charges in his apology for poetry. Taking the first charge, he argues that poetry alone teaches and moves to virtue, and therefore a man cannot better spend his time than in it. Regarding the second charge, he points out that a poet has no concern with the question of veracity or falsehood, and therefore a poet can scarcely be a liar. He disposes of the third charge, saying that it is a man's wit that abuses poetry, and not vice versa. To the fourth charge, he says that it is without foundation because Plato did not find fault with poetry, but only the poets of his time who abused it. Sidney's apology is the first serious attempt to apply the classical rules to English poetry. He admires the great Italian writers of Renaissance like Dante, Boccaccio, and Petrarch. All his pronouncements have their basis either on Plato or Aristotle or Horace. In his definition of poetry, he follows both Aristotle and Horace. That means to teach and delight. Thank you for watching this video.